Pronominal suffixes on imperatives. So this is our last set of pronominal suffixes. We've looked at the perfect and the imperfect, now the imperative. And again, we'll follow the same basic form. Here's our verb, here's our pronominal suffix. We'll take a look at the pronominal suffixes themselves. We'll look at the ending of the verb, and we'll look at the vowel changes that happen on the verb itself. Now these are even easier than the other two sets because the pronominal suffixes and the endings are exactly the same as the imperfect, which is natural because imperatives come from imperfects. You just take the second person form of the imperfects and you strip off the prefixes and you have your imperatives. So these two are the same, and then we have a few changes here a little different. We'll talk about that. But let's start with a review of these here, of the pronominal suffixes. Here's the list that we had for the imperfect, and the imperatives use this list here. So the very same thing, same endings, or the same pronominal suffixes, and the same tsere-based helping vowel. This tsere-based helping vowel is going to be important. It will distinguish it from some other forms, as we'll see in a moment. Now, let's review our imperatives. What do they look like? Well, we have the first one. We have picode, right? Picode, picdi, picode, picdi, picdu, picode, picdi, picdu, picodna. Picode, picode. Oh, what am I doing here? Can't write. Picode, na. Now, the way I told you to memorize these, or suggested that you memorize these, is just as a separate set. We know they come from the imperfects, but because they're so common, it's important just to have them at your fingertips. So, picode, picdi, picdu, picodna. And we noted when we looked at this originally that what we ended up here, when we took the prefix forms off the imperfect, we ended up with two shavas at the beginning of a word here for these two forms, because these are the ones with vocalic endings. So we had pretonic reduction, and we ended up with two shavas there. And so we had to apply the rule of shava, so we end up with a hidik on these two forms. You can go back to chapter 20 and review that if you've forgotten. We also noted that there was something called the lengthened imperative, which was an alternate form. And so instead of having picode, we had this form that had the kametz hatuf. So we had pok, where this is a closed unaccented syllable, so this sign here is kametz hatuf. Pok da. We had this lengthened bit. When you add this kametz he, which is the lengthening part, then you had this happening on the other end. It seemed like the holum was reducing to a kametz hatuf, long O to short O. At least that's what I was thinking. So these are our imperatives without pronominal suffixes on them. We've seen that the pronominal suffixes are the same as what you get with imperatives. The helping vowel is the same, so the end of the verb is the same. What about the base form? What happens is that with these two, you just add your pronominal suffix on the end, no problem. And Ross gives us an example with this here, picdu, which is the masculine plural. So let's look at that. Here we have down here picdu. So we have picduhu, so you just tack it on. Picduni, picdum, picdunu. Okay, so no changes there. You just tack it on, real simple. The difficulty comes here. With these two forms, the masculine singular up here and the feminine plural, what happens is they use this, or what seems to be the lengthened imperative form, or this this alternative form. When you add a pronominal suffix to one of these two, you end up with this. It uses this form. So you have pok for this, for instance, pok, and then we have the dalet here. So our holum has disappeared. We have this commensative instead. And then we add the regular endings. So we have the same helping vowel, the tsere-based helping vowel, as we have with the imperfect. So let's put our tsere in, for instance, and the same ending, so aim. So we'd have pok dame, for instance, rather than pikod aim. And let me show you that. Here we have, Ross gives us the masculine singular and the masculine plural. We looked at the masculine plural, those are regular. The masculine singular use this commensative, or this lengthened imperative form that has the commensative. So we have pok dehu, pok deni, pok dane, which is the one I just wrote, pok denu. So here's our commensative, and then we have our tsere helping vowel and our main. So these two parts are the same as the imperfect. What's different is that we have this vowel change. The vowel change where it uses the commensative like the lengthened imperative. Now, a point of confusion can arise with the infinitive construct. Because if you remember, I can write all this in here, the infinitive construct would be pikod, right? Just by itself. This is chapter 22. That's the infinitive construct. And, of course, this is the same as this, often. Okay? The masculine singular imperative is the same as the infinitive construct. When you add the endings, the infinitive construct also uses the commensative. Again, go back to chapter 22 if you've forgotten this. So it would go like this. We'd have pok there as well. And so here's our dalet. And if we put on the 3mp ending, what we get is am. So the infinitive construct without pronominal suffixes often looks the same as the masculine singular imperative without pronominal suffixes. So these two are actually often the same. When you put the pronominal suffix on, however, you can see a difference. The difference is not the base form because they both go to commensative. The difference is not the ending. The difference is the helping vowel. Okay? The helping vowel for the imperative is tsere. So the helping vowel will help you distinguish when you end up with this confusion or potential confusion between the imperative and pronominal suffixes and the infinitive construct. They can look the same. But the tsere helping vowel, which is what you have for the imperfect, you also have for the imperatives, which makes sense because the imperatives come from the imperfect. The infinitive construct does not come from the imperfect, and so it doesn't have the helping tsere, or the helping vowel tsere. And so this here is basically, I've taken the master chart, or the little bit of master chart that we had from the imperfect. So this is what the imperfect looks like. Yif kadehu. These two are the imperatives, the two examples that Ross gives us. So we have pok dehu. Okay, we have our commensative, so that's going to distinguish it from that. And also the fact we don't have a prefix here. The prefix, of course, is stripped off, right? And for the normal ones, the ones that don't go to commensative, we have pik dehu. So again, we have a hitic. We have a hitic here, but we have a prefix. The hitic here is on the first root letter, pakad, right there, p, right? Here it's on the prefix vowel, so you can distinguish them that way. But the endings are the same. The endings and the helping vowels are the same as with the imperfect. Now, sometimes this form will not actually use the lengthened imperative type form. It won't go to the commensative. And Ross gives us an example. See if I left a blank slide. Here we go. So Ross gives us an example of bahan. So let me write that down here. Bahan. Presume you write like that. Bahan. This means to examine. And if you add an imperative to it, it looks like this. Instead of going to to bo, see, 3ms, normally goes to commensatif, right? Well, this one, the 3ms form does not go to commensatif. It just stays with the shava. So we end up with this. Be, ha, neni. Now, the point here is not to have you figure out how to produce this, but I just want to show you something that Ross wants to show us. Bechaneni. So this is the imperative form of bachan with the 1cs suffix. But if you saw this in a text, you may say, okay, I think I got a verb here. I think I have a suffix. Looks like 1cs, right? Ni. That's fairly common. And let's see. Oh, we have a shava. Shava marks the perfect, right? And then next thing we have a kametz. Kametz marks third person. This looks like a perfect with a 1cs suffix. But in fact it's not. It's not a perfect, it's an imperfect. Sorry, it's an imperative. How do we know? Because, let me copy this. These things do mark the perfect, but the perfect does not have its tzere helping vowel. The perfect here would have a patach. So again, the tzere or tzere-based helping vowel is very useful. It helps us distinguish imperatives that can be confused with infinitive constructs, and it helps us distinguish imperatives that can be confused with perfects. So if you want to walk away with something here, other than knowing that imperatives take the same endings, the same suffixes, pronominal suffixes as imperfects, and the tzere helping vowel, with this changing, these two forms changing to the commensatif. Other than that, what I really want to emphasize here is this. Both the imperfects and the imperatives take tzere helping vowel. The perfect will not take a tzere helping vowel. It'll have some sort of A-type vowel, generally. Okay, there's a couple forms that do. I know there's some places where there's some confusion. But by and large, this will help you. And the infinitive construct doesn't take a tzere helping vowel. So if you remember this, when you see it in a text, it's these two forms, which are related to one another, that take the tzere helping vowel. And that'll help you distinguish things when you get in a bit of a bind where things look similar. But again, this is not there's nothing really in here in terms of paradigms that I think you should memorize. Know that there's a close connection between these two. Imperatives are related to imperfects, and so they take the same endings, the same helping vowel, which is what I'm trying to stress, and that in the masculine singular and in the feminine plural, actually, you end up with this commentative form that looks like the lengthened imperative.